So, David Guthro here with an episode of Discover Fresh Perspectives. And today, as my guest, I have Marla Simlet. Welcome, Marla.
Thanks for having me here today, David.
So, Marla, when we were chatting just a little bit before we started recording the call, you said one of the things you're passionate about is laughter and humor. And so maybe let's just go back to when did you discover that was something that was important for you, important enough to actually make a living talking about it?
Yeah. Um, I've always loved to laugh and make people laugh. And one of the things I wanted to be when I was a kid was a comedian. Um, didn't think that that was going to be a good career move. But so I've always used laughter and loved laughter in my life. But about 5 years ago, I started actually dipping my toe into kind of some of the stand-up comedy and being a little more intentional with laughter. I'm also a therapist, and I found I was bringing
Hmm.
laughter into my therapy sessions a little bit as a way to kind of lighten the mood and help people be less defensive. And I realized that that was kind of my purpose or my passion was to help people heal with humor, to help bring people to a spot where they could be a little more open to new perspectives and new ideas using the thing that I love, which is laughter and joy. So that is kind of where it launched.
So I'm going to go all over the place here
Yeah,
because,
yeah,
like I
yeah.
said, it's not an interview; it's a conversation. So when you say you use it in as a therapist, so how do you do that? How do you bring humor in? Because usually when people come to therapy, at least folks that I know, it's because there's something fairly serious going on.
Mhm.
So how do you use humor in a way that supports the conversation that has to happen rather than distracts from it?
Yeah, and certainly not therapy can be heavy work and a lot of heavy lifting. And so I don't, it's a fine line to bring humor and laughter in a way that doesn't detract from the seriousness of what somebody's going through or what they're dealing with. It's about finding those opportunities where um, you can you can shift the perspective a little bit. So, as an example, I'm often working with people with clients who have places where they're stuck and places
Mhm.
where, I'm doing the same thing over and over again. I see this pattern. I see this, I meeting, dating the same people or having the same conversations. And so because I do parts work, which is kind of identifying pieces of yourself, usually younger versions of yourself who have formed that's been their role to do that, and it was adaptive at the time, and now not so much. And help. So sometimes bringing humor in is about giving them fun nicknames and kind of
Mhm.
personifying those parts so that you can. It takes away shame a lot of the time. It takes away
Okay.
uh, kind of that internalization. You kind of put them. So this is Tammy too much, or this is you know.
Love it.
Betty Binger, or this is, giving different names so that you can then have a different relationship with those parts. So, I do that with myself sometimes, and Tammy too much is one of my things where if I think something's good, I'm going to do it more because then it's going to be better. And so I'll have conversations like, Tammy, are we really going to do this right now? And
Love
so it
it.
makes me laugh a little bit. What you focus on expands. So when you get that lightness of
Mhm.
energy from laughter, then it opens up a little bit to be able to think a little bit differently. And that's been my
Okay.
experience. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, you also said that you mentioned stand-up comedy. So, is that something that you did, you observed? What's your connection with stand-up comedy, which quite frankly scares the pants off me. You could not pay me enough to do stand-up comedy. So I'm curious about your experience with it.
Yeah, I started that. So I have a conference I go to every year, and they have a talent show at the last day of the conference. And I always sat there in the audience like, oh God, I'd love to get up there. I'd love to get up there. And one year I gathered up my courage and I get up there and told one joke. And people loved it. And it was like coming home. I loved it so much. And people were like, oh my God, you should write your own stuff. You should da 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 da. So I started doing that for um,
Mm.
that audience and writing some of my own bits. And I still do that every year. I actually MC their talent show every year and bring my
Oh,
comic
wow.
flair into that. But I did last fall take the opportunity to actually go to some of the comedy clubs in Vancouver and try my hand at stand
Oh,
up there. And
wow.
that's a different experience. um, I did okay. There was some crashing and burning. Um,
Mhm.
and I found that it wasn't my niche. It number one, you got to stay up really late to be there because they don't start the amateurs until really late. And I don't know that it was the audience that I was looking for, but it was a great experience. And so now I find I bring that stand up or that comic flair into the speaking that I do and the emceeing that I'm doing, and I get my satisfaction that way instead of kind of a comedy stage.
Well, and I mean that's very interesting that it wasn't your audience. So, do you have a sense of how you determine in advance how open people are going to be to whatever type of comedy you want to offer them? Is there any way to do that, or do you have to kind of try it first and see how people respond and then shift gears very quickly?
Yeah. I think shifting gears is key, and that's something I'm still learning. And that was what was so interesting about the comedy experience is that kind of you have to be right there with the audience and you have to be able to shift. And I was so used because I started my comedy, I do a lot of it online to a quiet audience when I'm doing because we do our and so I'm used to doing a monologue, right? And seeing people laugh but not kind of having the pauses. So the timing is very important and being able to shift. And then I think if you can know your audience. So the first time I got up on stage, Dave, I spent a week polishing this 4 minutes about the benefits of menopause. It was very funny. I thought it was very funny. Some other people thought it was funny. But I get up on stage and it's like 11 o'clock at night in Vancouver, and my audience is 20-year-old men and some women who've been drinking. They had no interest in listening to me. And so it was just like this lead balloon. And so if you can know your audience, so I've got that bit anytime I hear people talking about doing something with menopause, I'm like, I got a bit. You want me to come? And I'll share that with you, but not for a late night amateur hour.
So one of the things I'm thinking is that like one of the differences I see between being a stand-up comic or a stand-up comedian and someone who just uses humor in their work is that when you're a stand-up comedian, like you say, you have to have your bit. And when you're doing your bit, it's really hard when you have 4 minutes to do something totally different.
Yeah.
Whereas, so it's tough to be, I think, other than maybe quick repartees to the audience, it's really hard to be spontaneous. Whereas when you're working in front of a group and it's live, it's very easy to be spontaneous, and it's
Mhm.
probably very important to sort of bob and weave as you were referring to when things come up.
Yeah. 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 And that's why I love that, like the MC work. And I know you've done some
Mhm.
MC work as well. That's where I find it so much fun because you tune into the audience, you get
Mhm.
their energy and you're able to, do the callbacks on things like you're using some of these stand-up comedy techniques or comedy techniques. But using them in the moment. So if something funny has happened earlier on, you're able to talk about it later and linking things together. And I always like to try to come up knowing my audience, come up with some great metaphors to start with that you can weave in throughout the day and uh
Mhm.
and just let it take off. Like when I do that work, I really just go with the flow and be, as silly as and ridiculous as the event warrants. um and just bringing that joy and laughter.
So I'd like to stick with the stand-up comedy for just a moment,
Sure.
and I'll tell you why. Because what I'm curious about is, what you learned about yourself and thinking about going into it and doing it and deciding that wasn't right for you. And the reason I asked the question that a very, very successful speaker that I know took comedy at I think it was at Langara College or something like that, and where they teach jokes and write jokes and stuff like that. And she'd call up, frequently and say, "Try this, how's this, how's this?" And at the end of it, she said, "I came to realize that I'm not funny." and that I shouldn't try to be. That doesn't work for me.
Ah.
So, so what did you learn as you were going through that experience, both of deciding to take a shot at comedy or a stand-up comedy, doing comedy, and then sort of the after effect of that? So, if any of this stuff gets too deep, Marla, you could just pretend
No,
there's
I'm an
a
open
power
book.
failure. But I'm curious if you're willing to share that.
Yeah. It was quite the process because getting up on stage, that took me a while to get there, especially on the comedy stage. When I first did my one
Mhm.
joke, I knew the audience, right? Um, but to get up on that comedy stage is like, oh, I would never do that. Oh, I would never, well, maybe I could do that. And then I got to a point where it's just like, this is something I have to try.
Hmm.
And so there was a lot of prep. There was a lot of, one thing I learned is that I prep too much. And that's a theme in my whole life, like Tammy too much.
Hmm.
I want to be ready. I think if I can be ready, then everything's going to go well. And I was so ready. And I got up there and it just boom. And my husband was there. I brought him. I told him I couldn't have him sitting where I could see him, but I wanted him there kind of for support. And I walked off the stage and I got a chuckle or two, like, but I walked off the stage and I sat down and I immediately went into this, and I can feel it as I talk about this kind of like, well, that sucked. And, my husband was like, well, like, later on, I got some constructive feedback, but he was just like, good for you for getting up
Mhm.
there.
Mhm. Mhm.
But what I also learned is I didn't stay in that space. Like, I was like, you know what? Good for me. That was a big, big thing. And I see where there was some mistakes. And the next week I made up a different bit, building on that, because my second bit was, why do people get up here over and over again? And I built the whole thing on that's the theme of Comedians Anonymous, and how I had to go to Comedians Anonymous because I kept getting up on stage and falling flat. And I went back the next week and I did it again, and it went much better. But it was just that process for me of, I'm not gonna fail at this. I'm not gonna let that failure stop me. I'm gonna keep going.
So there's a couple of things I want to dive into here. I'm enjoying this. I hope you are.
Oh
But
yeah, I'm loving it.
so you talked about you were really ready. And so the question that occurs to me, how does being ready sometimes put handcuffs on us? Like what's the upside and the downside of being ready in whatever the context is?
Yeah. For me, so being ready helps me feel calmer. It helps me feel like I'm in control, and I'm going to be able to deliver what I plan to deliver, which is great if you're doing a presentation in front of a board or whatever. Like, I come from the corporate HR world, that's really great. Where it's not so good is the ability to bob and weave.
Mm.
So that ability to, so I will get on a thing, and it's like, it's like having blinders on, because, okay, no, I got to get through this. And I think the more uncomfortable I am, the more I get in that, because that's the plan. And it takes away from the ability to read the audience, to veer away because something is going to be funnier,
Mm.
than what you're going to say because of something that happened over here. Um, I had an experience on a podcast where the host all of a sudden had her headband was falling off, and I was so intent on what we were talking about, but what I really should have done was, oh, for the viewing audience, we're having a wardrobe malfunction, and that could have been really, so it just takes away from being able to
Mm.
be spontaneous.
So, and this, we can come back and talk about the importance of improv as a life skill as well.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
something else when your first performance, what you said, maybe it was intentional and maybe not, but I really liked it. You said, well, that sucked as opposed to I sucked. And
Yeah.
what's the difference between, why is that distinction important?
Yeah. Um, because I didn't suck. I got up there, I did a good job, I delivered the material, it was funny for the right audience, but it did not land. So
Mhm.
the distinction, and from a personal growth perspective, not taking that on as shame and blame and all the negativity we can put on ourselves, and detaching that, and this didn't go well, I didn't like this, but I'm still a funny and good and talented, person.
Well, and I love the fact that you took that experience and actually milked it, right?
Mhm.
Like, how can I use this? Because that's so real and so transparent. I love that.
Yeah.
So, Marla, why is laughter so important? I mean, not just for you, but for the
Yeah.
world, and maybe even more so these days than other days. What's laughter do for us?
Yeah. Laughter. So there is, when I started realizing the focus of my speaking career and was going to be on laughter, I did a really deep dive into the research. And I mean, decades of research on the physical benefits of laughter.
Mhm.
So the way that it lowers your stress and the stress hormones and promotes, good health and good cardio and all of that stuff.
Mm.
It also, for me, the biggest piece about laughter, and for me, I don't even think you have to actually laugh. If you can generate the energy of laughter,
Mhm.
you are, because it's the same kind of feeling as kind of gratitude and joy and positivity. And from a kind of, I do a lot of energy psychology work, and you can't stay focused on the negatives when you have positive energy coming in. So it's really hard. If I ask, sometimes I ask people, okay, so think of something really bad that's happened and somebody you're really mad at, or a situation that's really got you stressed out, and let's focus on that for a minute and feel that. And then we laugh. And it's really hard to stay in that place of anger or judgment or when you're laughing about something. So for me, it's like a great big reset button for change in perspective, change in mood, change in the energy that you're experiencing. And sometimes when I talk about energy, people are like, "Oh, it's kind of airy fairy." But always say, like, nobody can say they haven't walked into a room or been in a room where the energy has been heavy, and somebody cracks a joke, and you can feel it lighten up the room. You can feel it lighten up, or vice versa, right? The room's pretty light, and then somebody says something or something happens, and that experience of how energy can shift and how laughter shifts that energy for people.
So, well, there's so many other things that are occurring to me. Like, let's just take that one about shifting the energy, because I think it takes courage to do that. Like if into a walk into a heavy situation, it's so easy to let your mind go into what if I say this? What if that? What are the consequences going to be? And hold back. And sometimes it's exactly the release that's needed.
Mhm.
But even knowing that it's needed, it still takes courage to flip that switch to actually release that.
Yeah.
Um, and some environments love that and some don't. But you never know
Yeah.
till you try it. The other thing that was kind of visual image that came to mind when you talk about the power of laughter, that I was just thinking of hybrid cars that recharge the battery as you put the brakes on. Well, what if we thought that that laughter actually, refills us again, right? It's not just a brake, but it actually gives us energy to do more things. It's like, and these are all very personal projections here, but I have a spin bike over here. And I'm trying to, I'm going to have to get a couple of new knees in a little while. So I'm trying to get my
Oh,
body in
yikes.
shape for dealing with that. So I've got a certain caloric count that I'm allowed for the day. And if I think I want to be able to have a little bit more, I have to get on the bike again. So I can
That's
actually
right.
have more access to more calories if I'm on the bike. And what more we would be able to do in our lives if we gave ourselves more laughter to
Yeah.
fuel us up, to give us that energy back. It's not like there's a real hard case to be made that we should be laughing less because we're living in very serious times these
Mm.
days. It'd be really hard to make that business case.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that image you've given of, it's just kind of filling you up, filling up your gas tank, just like you need food, just like you need. And I mean, my husband, it comes from a biology background, and he's always saying, well, what's the
We
biological?
all come from a biology background,
Oh,
Martha. You're all born. I presume that's not what you meant.
no, no. He studied biology, and he's
Oh,
really
okay.
interested in kind of the evolutionary, like, when we talk about things, he said, well, that's how people have evolved, or that was the purpose of this. And I'm always like, you know, wherever we came from, whatever your beliefs are, laughter was given to us for a reason. right? And so what is that reason? And it's that it's a common denominator that brings people together, that builds trust. That there's one theory, that's one of my favorites, that they talk about social bonding. They're like, when we were apes, or apes use their social bonding is actually nitpicking, right? They're picking the nits off each other. And so they said one theory is that laughter has evolved, so it's actually nitpicking
Oh,
as a
interesting.
way of connecting each other. So I love that image. But what was my point? That yeah, so it was given to us for a reason, right? And that reason, I think, is to create those bonds and to fill us up, to be able to help us be in a more positive space. And we can focus on the negativity. And there's a lot of it. Like if you're a negativity junkie, fill your boots, because you don't have to look very far. Or you can focus on the positive, which then allows things to be in a different perspective. It puts you in a place where you can actually make a difference. Because that doom spiral, I mean, they call it doom scrolling, like you go down that. And I find sometimes I don't pay a lot of attention to the news. My husband reads a lot of the news, and I said, tell me if there's something I need to know, because I find I get into this place
Yeah.
and I'd rather be over here, so that if there's something I need to respond to, or then I'm going to be in a place of power and strength to be able to deal with it, in a place of positivity.
So I'm going to ask you a question that you may not be able to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyhow. So in terms of the quality of laughter, like to me, there's kind of a range from just kind of chuckling inside to a full body guffaw. So, how and the reason I ask this, because sometimes I see people once they start laughing, they can't stop. And then
Yeah.
there's just full bodied, and the people say, "Oh, I haven't had a good laugh like that for such a long time." Is there a way to shift gears from sort of the norm of the gentle chuckle, not really bothering anybody, to being willing to experience that full body, laugh that just kind of releases everything? Is there a way to
Yeah.
actually, engineer that or control that dial or the accelerator to get to that point? Because I think we could all use a lot more of that.
Yeah. I mean, laughter yoga, which is based on kind of, I can't remember the name of the person who invented it, but it's about bringing people into that place of full laughter. And it
Huh.
seems really safe at first. And I've done some laughter yoga classes. I know some laughter yoga practitioners. And and you start laughing, you do different exercises to laugh, but it doesn't take long before you're getting into this kind of contagious laughing. And the beauty is we're not that smart. Like our bodies and our brains don't recognize what is fake and what is real. You're still going to get the benefits of that. But often, and I mean, if you kind of, and then if somebody else started laughing before long, it's like a yawn, right? You're laughing and it's real. So I think laughter yoga is a way to move yourself into that state. But when I think about some of the deep, like those laughs that you can't stop, it's
Mhm.
very organic, right? And a lot of it I find, and I don't know, it's an interesting question, because I wonder if it's also related to comfort level, right? And connection, because I find I've had those experiences with people that I'm very connected with, and with people that I really trust, because then it's a very vulnerable state, right? In some ways, to let go into that complete laughter with it, where you don't have control. So I'm not
So,
sure, but that'd be interesting to look at.
well, you tweaked another thought, excuse me, which is about the importance of psychological safety and being in a non-judgmental environment. And sort of how do you see, maybe you can expand upon that, the connection between people's willingness to laughter and psychological safety, and what's the role of leaders, let's say, because you're in HR, working
Yeah.
with leaders. What's the role of leaders with respect to, creating an environment where laughter is okay, if
Yeah.
if in fact they believe there's value there?
Yeah, there's tons of research, David, on laughter in leadership and humor in leadership, and how it builds a leader's credibility, it builds trust in a leader, um, and helps build team cohesion, along with creativity and innovation and all of these things. One of the best books I've read on that, there's two Stanford professors who actually teach laughter and humor in the workplace as part of the MBA program at Stanford.
Oh,
and they have a book. I can't remember their names. It's two women. They have a book called Humor, Comma, Seriously. And it's a really great, quick, kind of fun, easy read, but it talks about some of the research that's been done in that area. What I find is that oftentimes leaders, if they're not naturally, so I've led teams in the past, and my teams were tons of fun. Well, I mean, we were very productive, very smart, but we had a lot of fun because I tend to like to bring fun into the workplace and the things that I do. And we'd look for the ridiculous, and we'd have, silly questions at the beginning of our team meetings. And I'm, my team was a happy, cohesive one when
Hmm.
in a place where that wasn't always possible. But I think a lot of leaders, or some leaders, feel uncomfortable with the idea of, they either think I need to be a stand-up comedian, or what if I bring laughter and humor in and they don't respect me? Like, what if it takes away from my professionalism or from my authority? Or what if we get on this roll and then I can't control it, right? Like, I've talked with leaders about what I like to call ABS, which is absurd brainstorming sessions. So if you start off a brainstorming session with throwing in anything and letting it get crazy and letting it get, it opens up creativity. And sometimes there's gems in that, right? But other times sometimes leaders are like, well, how am I going to bring that energy down again to get serious? Because this is serious stuff, not recognizing that bringing it up is going to open up the
Right.
innovation. And some people have, their own blocks to laughter as well, depending on what their experience has been, and, whether they've been shamed for being jovial, or, for things like that. So it's an interesting question.
I know quite often when I'm facilitating, whether it be a planning session or, excuse me, a town hall or anything like that, as part of the contracting conversation, I will generally have a conversation with the top one or two people in the organization to say that one of the things that I've found is you've just, suggested that for someone to be able to do that opens it up for everyone else. So I would like permission to, occasionally take just gentle little probing, not disrespectful, but shots or comments directed to you. And that's for people to see that it's safe to do that with each other as well.
Yeah.
And what'll determine if that opens it up is how you respond to what I say.
Yeah.
So if you just kind of frown and humph and stuff like that, that's going to send a very strong tone that we don't really have the freedom to have the kind of energy that's required to be truly creative. So,
Yes.
and most people are really, really good at that. Like one of the things I'll quite often do at the end is I have this, it's a powder called, I think it's called slushy powder or something like that. And so I'll talk about how it's not about what you've learned in here that's going to make a difference. It's what you do. And so I'll have this glass and I'll pour water into this glass. The slushy stuff is already at the bottom. And I'll say, so it's just like what we've been doing for the last couple of hours, the last couple of days is pouring ideas in. And I'll just for a demonstration, could you please come up here and ask the president, the CEO, whatever, to come up and sit in this chair? And so, what happens if we don't use it almost immediately? We actually lose the ability to do it. And of course, nothing comes out, but everyone is like in a
Ah.
total panic. It's only ever failed once where it ended up plopped on the person's shoulder, but it's, letting them allow themselves to be vulnerable because it actually serves them well to be human in these challenging times.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And the more human they can be, as you say, I love that, the more they're opening up the space for other people to do it. One of the things, and you kind of speak to this, is I have talk to leaders about, you don't have to be the funny one either.
Yeah,
You
right.
have to open up the space. And like you were doing, you curate your team as a leader, right? So find the person in the team that does have some of the funny, and allow there to be permission for that person to help you bring the funny too. So whether it's organizing a funny event, or a funny question at the beginning of a team meeting, but use your team, use them for the strengths that they have, because that's your job as a leader, right?
So again, I'm just reflecting on my role. And if I'm doing, excuse me, if I'm doing a keynote, I'll try to arrive the night before because usually there's a reception or something and just ask, so who are the crazy ones in this group? Who are the ones that are really fun loving? And go connect with them and let them know that I may refer to you the next day,
Yeah.
just again to set the tone. But Marla, there's probably some people listening to this. I hope there's hundreds of thousands of people listening to this, but even
At
if it's only
least.
two, and they're driving and they're thinking, oh, I really need to laugh more. What are a couple of suggestions you could give to them on how they could bring more laughter into their lives? I
Yeah.
think you
So it's International Humor Month, so it's a great month to be talking about laughter. And one of the things I've been talking about on some of my social media posts are the IGs and the eggs. And so the eggs are your internal giggle generators. So the things that you bring up, and I like to say that I was lucky to be born with an egg, an internal giggle generator, because I can just turn it on and off. So sometimes just doing that is enough to get some of that energy flowing. There's a woman in Australia, I can't remember her name either. At a certain age, names just leave your head until they come back in the middle of the night. And
I've heard
so
about
I'll
that.
call
Yes.
you. I'll call you when this happens. But she has what she calls a laughy prescription,
Hmm.
which is you get your phone and you do a 1 minute laugh into your phone, and then you bring it up for yourself.
Oh,
Or if there's
huh.
somebody with a really funny laugh, get them to do that so that you can prime the pump, so to speak, to get you laughing. You listen to your favorite comedian, you watch a funny show, you call your funny friend to get the. So those are some of your eggs, your external giggle generators.
Hmm.
So you find out, and I talk about this in my laughter intelligence framework, is that one of the things that's important to do is map your laughter signature, like knowing what makes you laugh so that you can use it, knowing how you make other people laugh so that you can use that in different environments. And laughter isn't something we think about a lot, right? We think it's somewhat spontaneous accident that happens, and it's you love it when it does, and you like those people who make it do it for you, but we don't think about using it intentionally. And I think
Hmm.
I mean, as a tool, it's free. You
Hmm.
carry with it, you have it with you all the time. And I have yet to meet somebody who can't do it.
Right.
So
Hmm.
why wouldn't you use it more often?
I think of listening to little babies giggle,
Oh,
right? Like it's more contagious than a yawn. But so this has been great, Marla. But before we go, I heard a rumor that you are going to be starting a podcast. So would you
I
mind just saying a little
am.
bit what that's going to be about? And we'll make sure with the title and everything, we'll put it in the program notes. So if people want to follow you, they can do that. So why are you doing a podcast? What's it going to be about?
Yeah. So my podcast is called Laughter Revolution. Come for the giggles, stay for the growth.
Hmm.
And I want to get the message out there that we can use laughter intentionally, and we should be using it more in our lives. So my hope is that people will come in. I'm going to be talking about different situations that come up, kind of blocks and issues and problems that are pretty common to most of us, how we can use laughter, and how I've used laughter myself to kind of get over some of those hurdles. I'm going to be talking to some experts in laughter. I'm actually taking it on the road for the first year.
Wow.
Season one subtitle is Where Laughter, Learning, and Luggage Collide,
Oh,
because I'm going to be traveling for 6 months. So I'm going to be finding things that make me laugh in other countries and other cultures and people that use laughter and talk about laughter. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be light, but there's also going to be some learning, because
hmm.
my passion is really not just laughing for the sake of laughing, although that's good too. It's laughing to help you grow, and
Right.
laughing to help you learn about yourself and become your greatest you and have the best life that you can. So it's going to be that combination. And I'm super excited about it.
So, Marla, I kind of have a hunch. If I were to predict, if you go someplace and don't find laughter, you will create it. It will. I just have a hunch. But thank you so much for being a guest today. I've
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed our conversation and look forward to following your podcast when it comes out. So, again, we'll make sure the name and everything is in the program notes. And yeah, so thank you for being here today.
Thanks. This was a great conversation, David. I loved it.
David
And
Guthro,
have a
Discover.
giggle.
Sorry.
Have a giggle.
Oh, like when I just kind of tripped over my own lines. Yes, I do that constantly. Have the eggs and the eggs. And yeah, so come on back next week, folks. I have another guest with a different perspective. In the meantime, between now and then, you might want to practice some of that laughing.